Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, they can't go inside the story, but the Maroons. And we will do it in the most authentic way. Una buckle on a seat, put your seatbelt, we can fly go Jamaica. But before we enter Jamaica, we get for make somebody inform me about who we can meet at Jamaica. The story we're about to hear, I want to let everybody know, this story has been told since the arrival of the Maroons by someone who traveled with the Maroons. His name is George Ross, and that story, when they landed in Freetown, was rewritten by an African American and Mavis Campbell. Then, sometime later, a Canadian who, learning about the importance of the Maroon in Canada, wrote about them. By that time, 568 of them left Jamaica to Canada. And then the most comprehensive one was finally written again by Mavis Campbell. This is how some of us are hearing the story, and we've had the story. And most recently, a California PhD student wrote again about the Maroons. So these texts exist about the Maroons, but yeah, down here on one side of the story, the other side of the story, now for hearing from the people themselves. And so that's how we are hoping to do it this session, starting with a trip to Maroon Town, Flagship, Maroon Town, Jamaica. So I'm gonna call on an older one in our meet who's been there to bridge this connection, to introduce the chief of Maroon Town in Jamaica. I'll call on Melbourne Garber to introduce Chief Michael for us.
Okay, Adrian. Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be a part of this. And I just want to say a few words just before I introduce my very good friend. As you know, I'm one of these passionate engineer historians. And so I always take the opportunity to say a little bit about the history of, sort of how we got here. So if you don't mind, I will spend just a couple of minutes just to talk about a couple of things regarding the history that will bring us to fitting introduction for Chief Michael Grizzle. So slavery from Sierra Leone, we all know more about it. It started in Sierra Leone around 1670, and Bonds Island quickly became its epicenter. Many of the initial enslaved Africans were brought to the West Indies, including Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and then later to Grenada. So, it continued obviously for a long time, and we had a lot of Sierra Leoneans, enslaved Sierra Leoneans taken to South Carolina and Georgia. But because today we're focusing more about the Maroons, I wouldn't talk about the Maroon War. I would let others speak about it, but I will basically just give a little brief summary about the Maroons from Nova Scotia to Sierra Leone. After the Second Maroon War, they were taken to Nova Scotia, and immediately they got there, they actually asked the British if they could return to Jamaica, but the British ignored them and they were denied. And obviously, from the time they actually went to Nova Scotia, they had found out that there was some Nova Scotian, Black Nova Scotians who had immigrated to Sierra Leone. So they started petitioning the British government to be repatriated to Sierra Leone. Again, they were initially ignored by the British government, but in 1800, in Sierra Leone, the Nova Scotians, who at that time were challenging the British authorities, started a rebellion. And coincidentally or fortuitously for the British authorities in Sierra Leone then, the Maroons who were in Nova Scotia were then put on ships and taken to Sierra Leone. They arrived, the numbers vary, but it was about 550 of them. They arrived in Sierra Leone in 1800, just in time to quell the rebellion. And maybe we'll talk more about that tomorrow. But one of the things, and maybe I should just go to the main point here, where it's to introduce Chief Michael Grizzle. One of the things we need to know is that there's a very strong influence of Maroon life in the Creole community. You know, there's some of the things that really have made the link strong is obviously what we call the Gumbe music from in Sierra Leone, which is a fixture at Creole festivities, and even the prints that Sierra Leoneans, that Creoles wear, is influenced by the Maroons. So about 6 years ago, I had the distinct honor of being invited to the Treaty Day. I think it was the second or third Treaty Day celebrations that they had in Flagship, Jamaica. And that is where I met Chief Michael Grizzle. We bonded, and we've been very close ever since. We actually also had Creoles visited Flagstaff again the following year, and I think I visited the year before. But Chief Michael and I have been friends for quite a while. We have constantly communicate. I've told him he is an honorary Creole. Well, maybe not even honorary, he is a Creole. And, you know, we are hoping that one day we will be able to get him to come to Sierra Leone and meet with his Creole family. So what I will say, one of the other things that I should just mention before I bring him on is that the mayor did mention about the celebrations of Freetown at 2:30 in March. And one of the things that we did read as part of the celebration was a letter from Chief Michael Grizzle of Flagstaff to the Freetown community on that anniversary. And so his links with Sierra Leone are very strong. And so on that note, I won't take any more time. I will welcome most heartily my brethren, Chief Michael Grizzle. Welcome, my friends.
Maha, Oyankopong Pikibo. I really to say, you know, greetings to all of God's children. It is great to be here. I really want to thank the African Curator Group, Mr. Akindale Decker, Mr. Adrian Labor, and my brother, Mr. Melbourne Garba, and Pastor Victor Barber Richards, I should say. It's my honor to be here on this kind of symposium, as our story as Maroons have been very distorted because there's two folds to our story. One is oral and one is written. And so most of it are written by a lot of our colonial masters, as most of our story was written on the table of our hearts. I forever would start our story a lot of times that, you know, we came out of melanin as a people in Africa, and we created ancient Tibet or ancient Egypt. And, you know, we crossed the Sahara Desert and controlled the gold and the spice trade and ruled Spain for 800 years when Spain was Al-Andalusia. And we would always look at, until 1492, I think, you know, with the rise of Isabel and Ferdinand, that sometime our story, you know, I do not start my story with slavery, as I think we are the masters and creators of all civilization. That in Al-Andalusia, you know, we created the astrolabe and the compass. And so the involvement of who they call Columbus, and wanted to gain riches for Ferdinand and Isabel. When Spain was Al-Andalusia, and in that era when Spain became Spain, that all Europeans were saying that the earth was flat and they would fall off the earth if they go over the horizon. We Africans were traveling even to the Caribbean centuries before Columbus ever arrived, even in Jamaica. So even these Africans who we considered on the whole of North and West of Africa, that they were even converted to Islam. And you know, the Quran is like songs, so it could be easily remembered. And these people who became even known as Moors, who built the Santa, the Nina, and the Pinta, these were 3 ships that Columbus decided to sail to find India. And so these Africans, and this is part of the oral story, that Columbus thought he was lost because the Africans who used to even come to the Caribbean, and these Moors knew about the Caribbean long before Columbus ever did. And so even in the history books that it showed that Columbus undergo a mutiny, and the first established town in Jamaica was actually called Seville. And we knew that in Al-Andalusia in Spain, we had Seville, Cordova, Granada. These were towns of Africans that that we saw with the arrival of these Africans from Al-Andalusia or Spain with Columbus. And this is how we see that these communities were formed in Jamaica that later became known as Maroon communities. We still look at between 1492 and up until, we would say, you know, until 1517, we knew between 1492 and 1517 that all Africans who arrived in Jamaica came from Al-Andalusia, Spain, until they were practicing what we call marronage, temporary and permanent marronage. That means some of them would go into the mountains and never come back, and some of them would go in the mountains and come back. It was not until 1517, between 1517 and 1523, it was the first time Africans were taken directly from Africa to Jamaica. And so it speaks to what we call the asiento. The asiento is a piece of paper that even Britain holds on up until today, that was granted to Portugal by Spain to import these Africans to Jamaica. These Africans were always known as the Rebellious Negroes. The word maroon were never used until maybe 1690. How it came about was because, based on our indigenous knowledge or our oral story, was that between 1517, for 150 years, the Spaniards were on this island, and the British, under the Western design, that everything that Spain owns, the British was taking it over, that the British decided to take over Jamaica. The British came here to stay in 1655. Admiral Penn and Venables, they came to stay, but that was not the first time that the British arrived in Jamaica. They arrived maybe 10 years prior, and the Africans who were on this island defended this island. So these people who later became known as the Maroons, who banded together, were the defender of this island of Jamaica. And so from 1655, when the British arrived, these Africans who banded together have a war with the British for 5 years. That war lasted until 1660, which resulted in the first treaty being established between Juan de Bolas and the British. The British saw Juan de Bolas on this island of Jamaica. He had his own army as an African. These communities were already established. And so his brother, Juan de Sierras, went and killed him, because Juan de Sierras' legacy was that, how can we allow the British to give us land that we already owned? So between everything within Maroon story, or these African story, is within a 50-year dispensation. Every 50 years, there's a milestone that we have reached. And from 1560 until 1690, when after the British established themselves on this island, then in 1690, there was an uprising because the British came and started to establish plantations with sugar and so forth. And these Africans, which became a thorn in the side of the British, these Africans were ever harassing the British. They were ever burning their plantation. They were ever stopping them from coming into the interior of the island. Most of the flat areas on the island, on the coast of Jamaica, on both the north and south coast of Jamaica, were established in plantation. It is said by indigenous knowledge that the Africans were the ones who gave the British permission to be on this island. So after 1690, emerged two names in Jamaica. These two names, they were of Coromantee descent or Akan descent, or from the Fanta people. That these two Africans, and it is said that they were wife and husband. We were not sure, our brothers and sister, but the two names were Kojo and Nani. So Nani became a figure, even in Jamaican folklore, that she is now one of the only female national heroine in Jamaica. She was placed in the eastern end of the island, and Kojo stayed in the western end of the island. So that figures, based on oral knowledge, that the entire island was for these, the Africans control the entire island. But then the British saw the need to suppress these rebellious Negroes. And so they referred to them as Maroons. And this is how the word maroon came about, that the British is saying that these people were wild and untamed. This word maroon came from Cimarron, which means wild and untamed, but you know, like a wild pig and very untamed. And these people, by 1720, is the commence of the first Maroon War, that the first set of Africans fight the British and move over into an area in Jamaica that is now called the Cockpit Country. The Cockpit Country is made up of approximately 5,000 karst limestone mountain. These mountains is a home to all endemic species of plants and animals for the cure and everything. And also it sits on 5 waterheads that provides 40% of Jamaica's fresh water. And so Kojo and Nani, they will build camp at the head of all of these rivers that they could control the water that flows down into the coast of Jamaica. And then by 1739, it was the war intensified. The British spent a lot of money to suppress these Africans. And when they saw that they could not dislodge them from this area that is called the Cockpit Country, which, as we say, is about 5,000 mountain and spans over about 500 kilometers, square kilometers, that the British could never dislodge them. So they decided to make a treaty with these Africans, and hence, not even in the treaty, the word Maroons were used. Yeah, it was only used to describe these Africans who were so rebellious. Within that treaty, even up until today, it became a discrepancy between the enslaved Africans and the Maroons, because the free Africans who were on this island, you know, if we go back to say 1609, where the census that was taken in Jamaica would show how many free blacks were on this island, people who would never been enslaved, never worked on a plantation. They had their own community. They had their own way of life. They had their own army. These people, and these are the people whose bloodline we recognize as being what we call today as the Maroons. These people, by 1739, established a treaty with the British. And with the British, this treaty stipulates in a clause that we, the Maroons, should help to capture all runaway enslaved Africans. And this is up until today that bridged the gap between Maroons and the enslaved population, that and which we did not, which a lot of people does not realize, that the British was very adept in divide and rule strategies, because we, the Maroons, could not allow a lot of enslaved Africans to come into our communities, because some of them came as spies. We always have to have 2 or 3 roads that leads into our community, so we could hide, outsiders or for British to infiltrate our communities. And the British had a militia. They had an army of Africans who was considered to be the black shots. And they would use these Africans also to hunt enslaved Africans, which was still blamed on the Maroons. By the end of the Second Maroon War, there was actually 50 years of peace between us and the British. In the treaty, our community, which is the leading community in Maroon legacy, which became known as Trelawny Town, which was named after the governor of Jamaica, which was called Edward Trelawny, between 1738 and 1739. We had 50 years of peace until the Second Maroon War. The Second Maroon War escalated in 1795. By 1795, we saw that no other communities there were 5 Maroon communities in Jamaica, and no one assisted the Trelawny Town Maroons. 360 of us challenged 5,000 British soldiers, who you had battalions such as the Light Dragoons, you had the Light Horse Guards. These battalions were like modern day Navy SEALs, that came up against 360 of us. And we inflict very great damage, based on even heritage of our granny nanny, who this female warrior, who the British was so afraid of her. And this is how the Islamic heritage of the Maroons were never explained, because in folklore in Jamaica, they say Nanny would catch bullets in her bottom. For me, or what my grandmother told me, it was not like that. Nanny was prostrating, and so when you prostrate and so forth, but the Almighty says, "You have no other God but me, fear nothing." And so if you're praying to your God, you should never fear. And this is Nanny, this is her legacy to us, that the British was so afraid that she would be praying and they come upon her, and she would not flinch. She would not look around, because she's praying and they would fire bullets, and bullets would go all around her and none touch her, because they were nervous and all of that. But the thing is that by 1795, in the Second Maroon War, that we came up, these warriors from Trelawny Town came up against the British, and the British would spread a propaganda that it was because they stole pigs and some of that. But they did not see the other side of it. That's why we have to read a lot deeper and do a lot more research into our story. Not just a story that is written about us, but to get the common denominator of what it is with the written history and what it is with our traditional knowledge that is passed down from generation to generation, and find these common denominators and search deeper into our story, that we do not teach our kids that slavery is their only legacy. We saw that, yes, it's a part of our story, but these people who later became known as Maroons, and what we saw in 1795, without the help of our brothers and sisters in Charlestown, Moortown, Scotts Hall, or a compound town, that only the Trelawny Maroons fight against that war about a land dispute. It was actually the essence of a land dispute, that they were encroaching on our borders. And we was to fight this war and became transported from this island. We were transported from this island in 1796. We ended up in Halifax in Canada. And when we ended up in Halifax in Canada, we built that citadel that is there in Halifax. Because as we know that that the war between America and Britain, you know, a lot of enslaved Africans who helped within that time, even helped the British, that they were also transported to Canada. And so we formed that bond, and we the Maroons with these people, you know, and learning of other people who had went back to Africa, back to with the Sierra Leone company, that we, our ancestors, sought also to go to Canada, to Sierra Leone. And we saw that out of the 600 or 598 Maroons, we always say it's about 600. And we still think that not all of them surrendered to Balcarres in 1795. We still think that some of us were still left on this island in the forest and didn't come out. And we saw with that 600 or 598 that went to Canada and then fought the government with the other Africans who became free and went now to Sierra Leone. And this is so important to know that these Africans who sought to go back to Africa, and then when they went to Africa in Sierra Leone, based on some of the researches that we have done, or to the oral history of some who came back, that in Sierra Leone, these Africans, even when they assisted the British to suppress the uprising in Sierra Leone, that they would also assist the free people to understand what it is to be forming communities, having their own democratic societies, and having an independent society, that and also to contribute to developing the platform for the foundation of the Creole language that is now spoken in Sierra Leone. I think the legacy of the Trelawny Maroons and the connection they have with Africa, because even being a Rastafarian, that in Jamaica, Rastafarians are saying, well, let's go back to Africa. Now they're between Sierra Leone and Jamaica and Trelawny Town, we see that people in Sierra Leone can now say, I'm a Jamaican. That is a very strong bond that should be taught, and these stories need to be told and retold and establish this platform between our communities. And I thank Mr. Garba for initiating this kind of a bond, that creating that platform between us and Sierra Leone, and with Amuda Masali, the government of Sierra Leone. We sent in 2010, we sent three persons, two Trelawny Maroons and a Peace Corps volunteer to Sierra Leone. And so in 2016, that is very historical. Nothing like that ever happened in creating this kind of platform, independent of any colonial government, that the government of Sierra Leone, government officials in Sierra Leone, Omatu Sise, Minister of Tourism, from the Monuments, and Isatu Simit from the Monuments and Relics Commission. And so in Sierra Leone, I visited our community and has further cemented. And there was a delegation, Pastor Victor Richard Baba, you know, and all those other people, Ronald Luke, you know, to remember a few that visited our community and has cemented this kind of relationship. And so it's a much honor for me today, you know, not to here to give an history lesson, but I hope that I have created an avenue that we could see how our communities were formed in Jamaica, and the struggles that we have been, and why we have established our link with Sierra Leone, and why in 1841, Maroons, 197 Africans came back to Jamaica, and 90 of the same bloodline Maroons came back to our community. So and thank you, Mr. Garba, for going to that research and giving us that list of, you know, when the Hector arrived in Jamaica. And I think that the bond between our communities is very cemented. And I think tomorrow we could go further into what we expect to achieve in the future, what we are doing as a fight that we have here in Jamaica of mining, of community, of how to create alternative livelihoods, of how to protect our indigenous knowledge, of doing all of that. And so I thank you guys very much for having me. And I hope that we have shed a little more light. And I will take back the message to my community that we are on this platform. And I so thank you all to the African Curator group for allowing me to express some of this knowledge. I thank you so much. God bless.
Yeah. Thank you, Chief Michael. Thank you very much. In Creole, we say we all not full after you've told the story. That's a lot for us to digest. It has fundamentally changed some of our minds, including myself, because I only understood my Maroon history up to slavery. Now I just had you give me a proud history that goes all the way back. Well, thank you very much for that.
Masters.
Okay. So thank you. So we have more from Jamaica, and for that I will pass it on to co-curator Kinele Decker.